Grace Mitchell had learned to make herself small. It wasn't something she'd been taught in the marble halls of the Montgomery estate where she'd grown up, surrounded by staff and privilege. No, this was a lesson beaten into her over 3 years of marriage to Derek Mitchell, a man whose charm had evaporated the moment the wedding reception ended. She stood at the kitchen sink of their modest apartment, her hands submerged in soapy water, washing the dishes from a dinner Derek had thrown across the room an hour earlier. Her left cheek still burned from where his palm had connected, the sting of familiar companion these days. Grace caught her reflection in the window above the sink, a ghost of the woman she used to be stared back at her. "You're pathetic," Derek's voice cut through the silence as he appeared in the doorway, beer bottle in hand. "Can't even make a decent meal. What good are you?" Grace said nothing. She'd learned that silence was safer than defense. Any word, any glance he deemed disrespectful would only make things worse. She focused on the plate in her hands, scrubbing at a stain that had been there for weeks. "I'm talking to you." Derek's voice rose, and Grace flinched, her shoulders hunching instinctively. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you." She turned, keeping her eyes downcast, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was her life now, a prison of her own making. 3 years ago, she'd walked away from everything. The Montgomery fortune, the family legacy, the empire her parents had built. She'd done it for love, or what she thought was love. Derek had been different then, or perhaps she'd been too naive to see the truth. Her parents had warned her. Her father, Richard Montgomery, CEO of Montgomery Industries, had seen through Derek's facade immediately. Her mother, Patricia, had begged her not to throw away her future. But Grace had been 23 and rebellious, convinced that love conquered all, that her family's disapproval only proved Derek was the one. So she'd left, walked away from the trust fund, the connections, the life of comfort. She'd wanted to prove she could make it on her own, that she wasn't just another spoiled heiress. She'd married Derek in a small ceremony with none of her family present, and she'd never looked back. Until now, standing in this cramped kitchen with her cheek on fire, she wondered if pride was worth this price. "You're lucky I even keep you around," Derek sneered, moving closer. Grace could smell the alcohol on his breath, see the familiar glaze in his eyes that meant the night would only get worse. "No one else would want damaged goods like you." The words cut deeper than any slap, because part of her had started to believe them. 3 years of this treatment had eroded her sense of self, had made her forget the confident woman who'd once commanded boardrooms and charity galas. Grace Mitchell, née Montgomery, had become a shadow, and she didn't know how to find her way back to the light. That night, after Derek had passed out on the couch, Grace allowed herself to cry. Silent tears that she'd learned to shed without sound, without drawing attention. She pulled out her phone, an old model Derek allowed her to have, with strict limits on who she could contact, and stared at the screen. She could call her parents. They'd come for her in a heartbeat, she knew. Despite everything, despite the 3 years of silence, they'd forgive her. But the shame was too heavy, too suffocating. How could she face them and admit they'd been right? How could she return home as a failure? The next morning brought no relief. Derek left for his job at the auto shop without a word, and Grace was left alone in the apartment with her bruises and her thoughts. She needed to get out, to breathe, to remember what it felt like to exist outside these four walls. She took the bus downtown. Derek controlled their one car, and found herself wandering through the shopping district she used to frequent in another life. The stores were familiar, but felt foreign now, like memories from someone else's existence. Grace caught sight of herself in a storefront window and almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her clothes were worn and ill-fitting, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face bare of makeup to hide the bruises. She was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't see the man until she'd collided with him. "I'm so sorry," Grace stammered, stumbling backward. Strong hands caught her arms, steadying her, and she found herself looking up into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen. "No harm done," the man said, his voice warm and concerned. "Are you all right?" Grace nodded quickly, trying to pull away, but his hands remained gentle on her arms. Not restraining, just present, safe. The realization almost made her cry right there on the sidewalk. "I'm fine, really. I should have been watching where I was going." She finally managed to step back, and his hands fell away. The man studied her face, and Grace saw the exact moment his expression shifted. His eyes darkened as they traced the bruise on her cheek, the one she'd tried to cover with foundation, but had clearly failed to hide completely. "That doesn't look fine," he said quietly, and something in his tone made Grace's carefully constructed walls begin to crack. I need to go." She turned to leave, panic rising in her chest. She couldn't do this, couldn't let a stranger see her like this, couldn't. "Wait," his voice stopped her, though his hand didn't touch her this time. "I'm James Hartley. And I know we just met, but I also know that look in your eyes. Please, can I buy you a coffee? No pressure, no expectations. Just coffee and conversation with someone who'd like to make sure you're okay." Grace should have said no, should have walked away and returned to her prison, and the man who'd put that bruise on her face. But something in James Hartley's eyes called to a part of her she'd thought was dead, the part that remembered what it felt like to be seen, to be valued, to matter. "Okay," she whispered, "just coffee." That coffee changed everything. James Hartley, Grace learned over the next 2 hours in a quiet cafe, was nothing like Derek. He was patient, kind, genuinely interested in what she had to say. He didn't dominate the conversation or make her feel small. When she spoke, he listened, really listened, as if her words held weight and meaning. He was also, though she didn't learn this until later, the James Hartley, CEO of Hartley Enterprises, a tech giant that had revolutionized the industry, a billionaire whose name was synonymous with success and innovation. But in that cafe, he was just James, a man who'd seen someone in pain and had chosen to offer kindness. They talked about everything and nothing. Grace was careful not to reveal too much about her past, about the Montgomery name she'd abandoned, or the marriage that was destroying her piece by piece. But she talked about books she loved, dreams she'd once had, the person she'd hoped to become before life had taken her down this darker path. "You have this light in you," James said as their coffee cups emptied and the afternoon sun slanted through the cafe windows. "It's dimmed, but it's still there. I can see it fighting to break through." Grace's eyes filled with tears before she could stop them. No one had seen her, truly seen her, in so long that his words felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. "I should go," she said, standing abruptly. Derek would be home soon, and if she wasn't there— "Can I see you again?" James asked, standing as well. "Same time tomorrow. Just coffee, just talking. You look like you could use a friend." Grace knew it was dangerous. Knew that every moment she spent with James was a moment that would make returning to Derek harder. But she was so tired of the darkness, so desperate for even a sliver of light. "Tomorrow," she agreed. Tomorrow became the next day, and the next, and the next. For 2 weeks, Grace met James at that cafe every afternoon. They talked for hours, and slowly, the woman she'd once been began to resurface. James never pushed, never asked about the bruises that appeared with alarming regularity, though she could see the anger that flashed in his eyes every time he noticed a new one. He told her about his life, his work, his own struggles with loss. His wife had died 5 years earlier in a car accident, leaving him to raise their young daughter alone. He spoke of loneliness and the weight of responsibility, of how sometimes success felt hollow without someone to share it with. Grace found herself sharing more too. Not everything. She still couldn't bring herself to admit who she really was, or just how bad things had gotten with Derek. But she talked about her dreams, the life she'd once imagined, the person she wanted to be. "You can be that person," James told her one afternoon, his hand covering hers on the table. "It's not too late, Grace. It's never too late to reclaim yourself." His touch sent electricity through her, a feeling so foreign after years of flinching from Derek's hands. This was gentle, reverent, as if she were something precious. When was the last time someone had touched her with kindness? "I'm married," she blurted out, though she wasn't sure why. Maybe because the guilt was eating her alive. Maybe because James deserved to know why she could never be what she was starting to wish she could be. "I know," James said simply. "I see the ring, even though you try to hide it. And I see the pain you're in. I'm not trying to complicate your life, Grace. I just want you to know that you deserve better. You deserve to be cherished, protected, valued. Whatever is happening in your marriage, you don't have to accept it." Grace pulled her hand away, her chest tight. You don't understand. I left everything for him. My family, my everything. I can't just. Can't what? Choose yourself. Choose happiness. James's voice was gentle but firm. Grace, I don't know what you left behind, but I know this. You're dying a little more each day. I can see it. And whatever pride is keeping you in that situation, it's not worth your life. That night, Derek was particularly brutal. Grace had been 10 minutes late coming home, and he demanded to know where she'd been. She'd lied, said she'd lost track of time at the library, but he hadn't believed her. His fists had left marks that makeup couldn't cover. And as Grace lay in bed that night, her body aching, she finally admitted the truth to herself. She was afraid, not just of Derek, but of herself. Afraid that if she left, she'd prove that she'd been wrong all along, that her family had been right, that she'd wasted 3 years of her life on a mistake she'd been too proud to admit. But James's words echoed in her mind. Whatever pride is keeping you in that situation, it's not worth your life. He was right. God help her, he was right. The next day, Grace didn't go to the cafe. She sat in the apartment, staring at her phone, trying to gather the courage to do what she knew she had to do. But fear kept her frozen. Then her phone rang. An unknown number. Grace, James's voice sent relief flooding through her. You didn't come today. I was worried. How did you get my number? She asked, though she wasn't upset. Just curious. I have resources, he admitted. Grace, I know I'm overstepping. I know I barely know you. But I can't stop thinking about you, can't stop worrying. Please, tell me you're okay. Grace looked around the apartment, at the prison she'd built for herself, and made a decision. I'm not okay, she whispered. James, I'm not okay, and I don't know how to be okay anymore. Let me help you, he said immediately. Let me get you out of there. You don't have to go back to wherever you came from if you're not ready. But you can't stay where you are. Please, Grace, let me help. And for the first time in 3 years, Grace chose herself. Within hours, James had arranged everything. A safe place for her to stay, a lawyer to handle the divorce, security to ensure Derek couldn't find her. Grace packed the few things she cared about, mostly books, and a single photo of her parents she'd hidden away, and walked out of that apartment without looking back. The divorce was ugly. Derek fought it, tried to make her life hell, but James's lawyers were better. And when Derek showed up at the hotel where Grace was staying, trying to force his way in, he was met with security and a restraining order. You'll regret this, Derek had screamed as security escorted him out. You're nothing without me. You hear me? Nothing. But standing there, watching him being removed, Grace felt something she hadn't felt in years. Power. She wasn't nothing. She'd never been nothing. She'd just forgotten. Over the next 3 months, Grace rebuilt herself. James gave her space, but was always there when she needed him. He didn't push for a relationship, didn't expect anything in return for his help. He just cared. genuinely, deeply cared. They spent time together, slow and careful. Dinners where they talked for hours. Walks in the park where Grace rediscovered the simple joy of sunshine on her face. James introduced her to his daughter, Sophie, a bright 8-year-old who took to Grace immediately. "You make my dad smile again," Sophie told Grace one afternoon as they colored together. "He hasn't smiled like that since Mommy died." Grace felt her heart swell. She was falling for James Hartley, and the realization both terrified and exhilarated her. After Derek, she hadn't thought she'd ever want to be with anyone again. But James was different. James made her feel alive. One evening, 6 months after they'd first collided on that sidewalk, James took Grace to dinner at an exclusive restaurant overlooking the city. They'd been seeing each other officially for 2 months, taking things slowly, letting Grace heal and discover who she was without fear and pain. "I have something to tell you," Grace said, as dessert was being served. She'd been carrying this secret for too long, and James deserved the truth. "About my past, about who I really am." James reached across the table, taking her hand. "Grace, I know who you are. You're strong, resilient, compassionate. You're an incredible woman who survived something terrible and came out the other side. That's all I need to know." "No," Grace insisted. "You need to know the truth. My full name, it's Grace Montgomery. As in Montgomery Industries, I'm the daughter of Richard and Patricia Montgomery. I walked away from all of it 3 years ago because I thought I was in love, and I've been too ashamed to go back." She watched James's face for shock, for judgment, but found only understanding. "I know," he said gently. Grace blinked. "You know." "I've known for a while," James admitted. "Your parents and I move in similar circles. I saw your photo at a charity event years ago, before you left. When I met you on the street, I recognized you, though you'd changed so much. I didn't say anything because I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." Tears filled Grace's eyes. "You knew, and you still helped you, cared about you." "Grace, I didn't fall for the Montgomery name or the fortune. I fell for the woman who loves old books and takes her coffee with too much cream and makes my daughter laugh. The woman who's brave enough to walk away from abuse, even when she's terrified. That's who I see when I look at you." James stood then, moving around the table to kneel beside her chair. Grace's heart stopped as he pulled out a small velvet box. "Grace Montgomery Mitchell, soon to be just Montgomery again," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know it's fast. I know you're still healing. But I also know that life is too short to waste time when you find something real. I love you. Sophie loves you. And I want to spend the rest of my life showing you what it means to be truly cherished. Will you marry me?" Grace couldn't speak through her tears. She nodded over and over as James slipped a stunning diamond ring onto her finger, a ring that symbolized not possession or control, but partnership and love. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, James, yes." Their engagement made headlines. The return of the Montgomery heiress, engaged to billionaire tech mogul James Hartley, was the talk of every social circle. Grace had been nervous to face the world again, but James was beside her every step, his hand always in hers, his support unwavering. She'd also reconciled with her parents. The reunion had been tearful and beautiful. Her mother had held her for what felt like hours, and her father, stoic, powerful Richard Montgomery, had cried as he told her how much he'd missed her. "We always knew you'd come back to us," Patricia had said. "Not because of the money or the name, but because you're a Montgomery. And Montgomerys are survivors. We're fighters. You just had to remember that." But Derek wasn't done causing trouble. 2 weeks before the wedding, Grace was leaving a dress fitting when a familiar figure blocked her path. Derek looked worse than she remembered, haggard, desperate, angry. "Grace," he said, and hearing her name from his lips made her skin crawl. "We need to talk." "We have nothing to talk about," Grace replied, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "The divorce is final. It's over." "It's not over until I say it's over," Derek snarled, moving closer. "You think you can just leave me, humiliate me, and then flaunt your new billionaire boyfriend all over the news?" "He's my fiancé," Grace corrected, standing her ground. "And yes, I left you. I left because you abused me, because you made my life a living hell. I'm not that woman anymore, Derek. You can't hurt me." "Can't I?" Derek's smile was cruel. "I know things, Grace. I know you gave up your family fortune for me. Makes you look pretty stupid, doesn't it? Wait until I tell the press about how the great Montgomery heiress was so desperate for love, she married a mechanic and let him beat her. How's that going to look for your precious family reputation?" Grace felt the old fear trying to claw its way back. But then she thought of James, of Sophie, of her parents, of the woman she'd become. And she smiled. "Go ahead," she said calmly. "Tell them, tell everyone, because here's what they'll really see. They'll see a woman who was brave enough to follow her heart, even when it led her astray. They'll see someone who survived abuse and found the strength to leave. They'll see a survivor, not a victim. And they'll see you for exactly what you are, an abuser trying one last time to control a woman who's moved on." Derek's face reddened with rage. "You think you're so special now. You're nothing. She's everything." James's voice cut through Derek's tirade like a blade. Grace turned to see him approaching, flanked by security, his expression cold and dangerous in a way she'd never seen before. "And you," James continued, stopping in front of Derek, "a restraining order violation away from jail time. I suggest you walk away now while you still can." Derek looked between them, his bravado crumbling as he realized he'd lost. Whatever power he'd once held over Grace was gone, burned away by her strength and the love surrounding her now. "This isn't over," Derek muttered, but it was the empty threat of a desperate man. Yes, Grace said firmly. It is. They watched Derek skulk away, and Grace leaned into James's embrace, feeling safe and whole. Are you okay? James asked, concern in his eyes. I'm perfect, Grace replied, and she meant it. The wedding was a grand affair, attended by society's elite and covered by every major publication. Grace walked down the aisle in a stunning gown, her father on one arm and her mother on the other, both beaming with pride. Sophie was the flower girl, and she took her role very seriously, carefully dropping petals before Grace. But the most beautiful moment came when Grace and James exchanged vows. Standing before their loved ones, Grace spoke from her heart. James, you found me when I was broken and showed me how to be whole again. You didn't save me, I saved myself, but you gave me the courage to do it. You showed me what real love looks like, how it should feel to be cherished and valued. You and Sophie gave me a family, and I promise to love you both with everything I am for the rest of my life. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. As they danced at the reception, Grace caught sight of Derek outside, being turned away by security. He tried to crash the wedding, one last desperate attempt to ruin her happiness. But Grace just smiled and held James tighter. You see him? James asked quietly. I see a man who tried to break me and failed, Grace replied. I see my past, but when I look at you, I see my future. James kissed her then, deep and loving, and Grace knew she'd finally found where she belonged. Not in a name or a fortune, but in the strength she discovered within herself, and the love of a man who saw her true worth. Grace Montgomery Hartley had walked through fire and emerged not just unburned, but refined. She'd learned that sometimes the worst detours lead to the best destinations. That pride can be a prison, but humility can be freedom. That real strength isn't never falling, it's getting back up. And as she danced with her husband under the stars, surrounded by love and joy, Grace knew that her story wasn't about the man who'd hurt her or even the man who'd loved her. It was about the woman she'd become when she finally chose herself. That was the real, happy ending.